You're listening to an Ono Media podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Into the Dark podcast. I'm your host, Payton Moreland. I am so glad you are here, either watching or listening to this true crime / dark spooky everything podcast. If you are new to the channel or the show, can you please subscribe, follow the show, turn on notifications, turn on downloads, and please leave a comment on the YouTube video or over on the Into the Dark podcast Instagram. Leave a review. Guys, it's just a great way to interact with the show and it really helps out more than you know. But either way, as always, I'm just so happy you are here. Jumping into my 10 seconds for the week. I just got back from Idaho, which is where I was born and raised. I was there visiting family, but I'm back and I'm settled and it feels so great. I still have been going to the chiropractor, still have been going to the gym, stretching, all the good things. I did just order some new spooky coloring books for Halloween coming up. You guys know I color on my iPad, but I also do love to color with my markers too. And so I'm really excited for those. Also, if you missed it, on my personal Twitch channel, which if you don't know what Twitch is, it is just a live streaming platform where it's just easier to live stream on there than say TikTok or Instagram. It's a live streaming platform. It is free to join. I have a personal channel over there where I go live almost every single day, just doing stuff with my life. Sometimes I play Fortnite. Sometimes I do get ready with me's. This last week, I did build a spooky fairy garden with me while live. And I went to Michael's and I bought all this stuff and it was so fun. And I built this fairy garden live on stream with all of the viewers talking in the chat, playing music. It was such a vibe. It was so much fun. So if you are interested in kind of seeing that side of my world, go ahead. The links are everywhere in my personal Instagram. You can just go and follow me on Twitch. But yeah, that is all I have, I think, for today. So let's jump right into the case. All right. So in a perfect world, we would all have great relationships with our family members. Parents would support and love their children unconditionally, and kids would adore and respect their mothers and fathers. They would understand that even when they don't like certain rules and restrictions, they exist to keep everyone healthy and safe. Now, sadly, we don't live in a perfect world. Some families are dysfunctional, and even healthy, ordinary people can have strained relationships with their relatives. And in some cases, nobody has even done anything wrong. It's just that people don't click for whatever reason, even if they are related by blood. But of course, there are also families where everyone is close and loving. And to all appearances, that once was true of the Van Gelderens, who lived in Druid Hills, Georgia. Now, Druid Hills is a very upscale neighborhood outside of Atlanta, and it's known for being wealthy, nice, and safe. I mean, with a last name like Van Gelderens, I would hope so. So the Van Gelderens were a family of 4. The parents, Roseanne and Leon, were a happily married couple. They had 1 son and 1 daughter, Will and Jenna. Now, Jenna, the daughter, had a reputation for being very quirky. Even at a young age, she was smart and high energy, and she wanted to understand everything she could about the world. So she asked questions constantly. Jenna never seemed to notice if the person she was talking to was busy or distracted, or if they just didn't want to talk to her. She would ask question after question until the other person got annoyed and asked her to leave. And it's great to be curious and to want to learn more, especially as a child. But Jenna's habit made it difficult for her to make friends in her area. Other kids at her school avoided her because they didn't want to listen to her nonstop. And by the time she was in middle school, Jenna realized she was not very popular. She regularly got snubbed when her classmates sent out birthday party invitations or threw sleepovers. And since she didn't have many friends her own age, Jenna became even closer to her brother and her parents. She was kind of known as the glue that held this whole wealthy family together. In fact, Jenna had a knack for organizing and planning events, so she never forgot anyone's birthday, anniversary, or any major holiday. Jenna was also very organized, and as she grew up, she followed a strict schedule, and it was something that her family really appreciated about her. The problem was, by the time Jenna was a young adult, she was still very lonely. Her family couldn't be her entire world, and she wanted real friends. She was so eager to be liked and accepted that sometimes she would actually let her guard down with the wrong people. There were cases when her peers pretended to like her just to use her or embarrass her, and Jenna fell for those kinds of tricks again and again. She only wanted to get along with people, and that stopped her from being as careful as she might have been otherwise. But beyond that, Jenna seemed to have a hard time reading social cues, just like when she was younger. It was much tougher for her than it was with other people. And Jenna's parents worried about this. So in 2016, when Jenna was 24 years old, they actually encouraged her to speak to a doctor. And that's when Jenna was diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. Now, autism affects people very differently, and there is no one universal experience with it. But in Jenna's case, as we already know, it meant that she just had a hard time making friends, and she could be overly trusting when she met new people, which in turn meant that she had a lot of fake friends who only pretended to like her, but they didn't have her best interests at heart. In fact, according to her father, Leon, she fell in with a bad crowd around early 2017. This was just a few months after she received her diagnosis. She's 24 years old. And I don't know the full details on who these people were and what they did, but as soon as Jenna's parents heard about them, they knew that these people were bad news. The problem is that when Leon and Roseanne warned Jenna about her new friends, she defended them. She didn't want to believe that these new friends could hurt her, except the truth was that her life was already kind of headed in a bad direction. See, Jenna had a job working at a pet store. It was the first full-time position she had ever had, and Jenna was so excited to make money and take on adult responsibilities. She was also a huge animal lover, so it was basically the perfect job for her. But around February or March, so not long after she started hanging out with her new friends, Jenna actually got fired. The store managers had learned that she had stolen cash from them, about $3,000 in fact. This wasn't something they just suspected, they knew Jenna had done it. And in addition to her firing, they also filed a police report against her. So Jenna was soon charged with misdemeanor theft. But she had to wait for her trial date to see what kind of trouble she was actually going to get into. Now, as soon as Roseanne and Leon heard about this, they were shocked. They did not believe their daughter Jenna would ever steal from her job. She was usually honest and trustworthy, and it's not like she really needed the money. The only explanation that they could come up with was that maybe her friends had pressured her to do it. Perhaps they were using her for money, and she began stealing on their behalf for acceptance. The problem was at this point, her parents were suspicious, but they couldn't back up their suspicions with evidence. They certainly couldn't prove that Jenna's friends had anything to do with this theft. And unfortunately, Leon was hesitant to ask Jenna about it directly. They were kind of walking on eggshells. After all, every time he had criticized her friends in the past, she had stood up for them. So instead of talking over the situation, he actually decided to just go through Jenna's phone. They were on the same family plan, and it was set up so he could pull her call and text records at any time. His hope was he would find an incriminating message that would prove Jenna was innocent and that her friends were to blame. And I don't know exactly what he saw because that specific information hasn't been made public, but whatever it was that he found on her phone, it had him feeling more convinced than ever that Jenna's friends were bad influences. So, armed with this evidence, he went to Jenna and told her, hey, you have to stop seeing these friends. Now, of course, Jenna asked him a lot of questions about why he didn't like them and why he was so upset. Remember, she loved to ask questions. And when she asked him why he disliked all of the people that she was friends with, he confessed. He admitted he'd gone through her private messages on her phone. Well, once Jenna heard that, a full-grown adult, she felt completely betrayed. She announced that she was actually going to move out from the family home because she needed space from all of her family. And then in April of that year, Jenna went out and found an apartment to live in, but she refused to tell her parents her new address. She said this was necessary. It was the only way for her to get the freedom that she needed. She had to figure out who she was as a person and ensure that her boundaries were respected. Now, let's be honest, this all sounds very intense, except even though Jenna was living away from her parents and hiding her address, she still loved them. She still wanted to be close to them. She didn't cut them off entirely. She and her family did remain fairly close. Jenna talked to her mother on the phone every single day. And she actually still called Leon and Roseanne daddy and mommy. She'd never grown out of using those nicknames, and it showed that deep down, she still felt close and affectionate toward them. Now, on top of that, she still came back home and slept in her own bedroom on a pretty regular basis. To be clear, she had no plans to move back home permanently, but the point was that even though things were kind of tense, Jenna still loved her parents and wanted them to be a part of her life. In fact, she admitted to one of her friends that she wasn't even actually angry with her mom or dad. She hadn't moved out to try and hurt them or punish them. Instead, she just felt like they disapproved of the way she was living her life, and she wanted the freedom to try new things and figure out who she was as an independent adult without them always keeping tabs on her. So basically, in Jenna's mind, she wasn't rebelling. The secrecy and the new apartment were just necessary steps on the road to growing up. She was working hard to still be on good terms with her parents, and everyone was doing what they could to keep the peace and get along. So all of this brings us to mid-August of 2017. Jenna had been living on her own for about 5 months by this point, and Leon and Roseanne had a trip planned to Canada. Problem was that they had to leave behind their 21-year-old cat, Jessie. Now, Jessie, the cat, was very old and had some medical conditions. Every day, someone needed to give the cat medicine, and some of the meds actually needed to be injected with a needle. So the Van Gelderens needed to be careful about who they used as a cat sitter while they were gone in Canada. Needed to be someone who was responsible, who understood Jessie's needs, and obviously there is one obvious answer: Jenna. She'd always loved cat Jessie. The two of them had kind of grown up together. And since she also knew how to take care of Jessie and handle the medical needs, she was the natural choice. So her parents asked Jenna to stay at their house while they were gone and kind of take care of everything. And Jenna agreed. And she also knew that a vet was going to come over to the house on the morning of August 19th. So this person was supposed to give Jessie a shot that Jenna couldn't administer herself. It was pretty routine, honestly. The Van Gelderens were used to vets making house calls. And it's also worth remembering that Jenna had always been very organized and good at sticking to a schedule. So she should have had no trouble watching the cat while the parents were gone, and then when the day came, making sure she was home that morning to let the vet in. Except when the vet arrived, they knocked on the door and nobody answered. The house was dark and quiet, like no one was home, and the door was locked. Well, the vet isn't going to leave. They know that the cat needs the medicine, and they had already driven all the way out to the family's home. They didn't want to turn around and go home without seeing the patient. The good news is they had a phone number for Jenna's brother, Will. So they called him, and he rushed over to the house to open the door and let the vet in to tend to the cat. But once he got inside his family's home, Will found that the house was in an odd condition. First of all, there was no sign of Jenna anywhere. She would have never forgotten about this vet appointment. She would not have left without making arrangements for someone else to unlock and open the door. Plus, it was pretty obvious to Will and the vet that Jessie the cat was hungry. She clearly had not been fed. Except Jenna would never have neglected Jessie in ordinary circumstances. Now, the lights and the TV were both on, and Jenna always made a point of turning everything off when she left her room. She just would not have left the house like this. Except clearly she had left. She had a suitcase full of clothes and things for her cat-sitting stay. But the bags and her clothes were now all gone, like she had packed it back all up and left with them. And so was her phone. And her car was also missing. However, her makeup was still in the bathroom. A pair of her shoes were still on the floor in the house. And her charger was even still sitting by the outlet. So this is all very weird. This just does not explain Jenna at all. And immediately it's a red flag. But something else was missing. It was something that kind of defied explanation. See, the family owned this big Egyptian tapestry that they had displayed on their wall, and it was about 5 feet wide and 2 feet long. So it's a pretty big piece of art. Even though it wasn't worth much money, they kept it safe inside of a frame. Well, when Will goes in the house and looks at the wall, he realizes the frame is there, but the tapestry inside was gone. Someone had actually cut the glass to remove it rather than just taking the entire thing. And this was super weird for a few reasons. First of all, like I mentioned before, the tapestry didn't have any real financial value. The Van Gelderens kept it for sentimental reasons because it had been in their family for generations, but there was honestly no reason for anyone to steal it. Plus, other than the missing tapestry, there were no other signs of a break-in or a robbery. The house was still clean and tidy. It hadn't been ransacked. None of their valuables were missing. And of course, like I said, all of the doors were locked until Will got there to let the vet in. And it's not like Jenna had any reason to steal the tapestry herself. Even if she'd wanted to, she wouldn't have cut the glass out of the family frame. It would have been much easier to just remove the tapestry from the back of the frame. And more importantly, Will was pretty confident when he sees the house that Jenna, his sister, had not left the house intentionally. He knew she would never go anywhere for the night without her makeup, chargers, and shoes and leave the cat alone. She was very particular about always following her routine, which meant putting on makeup every morning, charging her phone regularly, taking her shoes with her when it was time to go. Maybe she had forgotten something if she'd left in a rush, except if she was in that big of a hurry, why cut up a frame and take a big, bulky, useless tapestry with her? The scene when Will gets there as a whole is bizarre and confusing. So Will has no choice but to call his parents and explain the odd situation going on at home. Now, as soon as Leon and Roseanne heard the news, they knew it was serious. They know Jenna was not the sort of person to pull pranks or just take off without a word. So even though they hadn't seen the house for themselves, they knew something was wrong. They trusted their son, Will. So they booked the first flight back home that they could find. That still obviously meant they weren't able to make it back for 2 more days. And during those 2 days, the situation just felt unreal. Intellectually, Jenna's mother and father knew this was an emergency, but on another level, it kind of just felt like a bad dream. Roseanne couldn't shake the feeling that any minute now, Jenna was just going to call and explain she was okay. And even when Roseanne pulled up to her house on August 21st, she half expected Jenna to just come running out the front door. She'd have a wild story about what had happened. Except, of course, that was not the case. She and Leon went inside, and the house was in the same state that Will had found it. Nothing had been moved or disturbed, and that drove the reality of the situation home. It was pretty undeniable to the family that Jenna was missing. Roseanne and Leon called everyone they could think of, family members, friends, and casual acquaintances who knew Jenna. They asked everyone if they had seen or heard from her or if they knew where she was staying, but everyone said the same thing. No one had heard from Jenna since the 19th. This was the same day that Jenna had failed to let the vet into the house. So finally, Roseanne and Leon knew what they had to do. They called the police to report Jenna's disappearance. Now, right away, the investigators pulled phone records and traffic camera footage. They interviewed potential witnesses, and before long, they had kind of built a timeline. This is what they found out. They knew that Jenna was definitely alive and well on August 18th, the day before the at-home vet visit. That evening at about 10:30 p.m., she went out with some friends. She stayed out late, past midnight. But by 1:15 in the morning, she was back at her parents' home. The police knew that from her phone records. She was inside when she called a friend, someone she hadn't gone out with that night. Now, her and this friend chatted for a while and then hung up. But afterward, Jenna and the same friend stayed up for a while texting. They actually texted each other until 2:15 in the morning. That's when Jenna sent her last text message ever. Said she was tired and she was going to bed. So there was no clue in the thread about what might have happened after that. No sign that she was in any kind of danger or feeling threatened, at least not anything that the police found in their preliminary investigation. It seemed like she went out that night, came home, talked to her friend, texted her friend, and then disappeared. Except they actually learned something else that is worth mentioning. They discovered that Jenna owned 2 cell phones. One was on the same family plan as her parents. You'll remember that Leon had gone through her records before Jenna moved out, and he was able to do that because of the family plan setup. But now the investigators learned that after that fight and her dad going through her phone, Jenna had actually bought a second phone that was not on the family plan. In fact, she was paying for it herself, and she never told anyone in her family about it. This was a shock to the Van Gelderens, and they didn't understand why Jenna would do it. The only theory they could come up with was that Jenna must have bought a secret phone so she could talk to people without her parents knowing. It gave her the privacy she was obviously craving. In fact, her second phone was set up so it didn't save any text messages. So even after the police pulled the records, they couldn't get a handle on who she had been talking to on this second device. But one thing was clear. Jenna had not just been hiding her address from her parents. As the investigation goes on, they discover that she had been hiding a whole secret life. Now, this was a pretty big blow. It basically left Roseanne and Leon feeling like they didn't even know their daughter anymore, and she's now missing. But it got worse. See, by early September, Jenna still hadn't been found, and the police didn't really have any leads about her disappearance. By the 5th, it had been 2 full weeks of no news and no updates. But that day, investigators found Jenna's car. It was parked at the side of the road with a nearly empty gas tank. It was just 7 miles from her house, and it was pretty obvious that Jenna hadn't driven it there. For one thing, the driver's seat was pushed way back the way it would be if someone tall had been driving, and Jenna was only 4'11". She wouldn't have even been able to reach the pedals given how the seat was left. And on top of that, the police found a phone charger and a pair of shoes in the car. They weren't Jenna's shoes, and the charger wasn't compatible with either of her phones. So again, this must have belonged to someone else. Except the police also found a pair of Jenna's shoes in the car, along with her glasses, suitcase, and wallet. Again, these were things that she would not have left behind after parking at the side of the road. So the discovery of the car isn't looking good. And here's where things get pretty weird. The police knew Jenna's car had been driving at about 7:45 on the morning of August 19th. This is just a few hours before she missed that vet appointment. They had learned that by taking witness statements and pulling data from automatic license plate readers. And they also knew that at that time, the car was near downtown Atlanta. But at almost the exact same time, her cell phone pinged a tower, and that tower was 30 miles away from Atlanta in a grassy wooded area, which means that on the morning of the 19th, Jenna's car and phone were not together. Someone had the vehicle and someone had the cell phone. And the cell phone ping was really concerning because that remote forested region was basically the perfect place to dump a body. It was far away from any potential witnesses, and all of the trees and underbrush could perfectly hide a crime scene. The police eventually sent search teams to scour the woods and to look for Jenna. And while they didn't find anything, there was always a chance that they may have missed a key clue that could have broken the case open, or even Jenna's remains. See, Leon and Roseanne were hopeful. They publicly announced that they would give a $50,000 reward to anyone who could provide any usable information about the disappearance. Except they don't get a single tip. They don't even get prank calls or people lying to collect the reward money. People all across Atlanta were silent. It was like Jenna had just vanished off the face of the earth. But her family still was not going to give up on her. They knew the police were trying to find her, but the Van Gelderens knew they could do even more. Every morning over breakfast, they would talk about what they knew, what they needed to learn, and what new strategies they could try. Now, her brother Will actually talked to all of Jenna's friends. He scoured internet discussion boards. He read every theory that was online. And each time he thought he'd found a new lead, he would chase it down and investigate it himself. It actually helped that before her disappearance, Jenna had actually shared her email and Facebook passwords with Will. They just kind of had that close of a relationship where she didn't hide anything from him. So now Will was able to log on, read all of her emails and DMs, and that's how he found a conversation from the night of Jenna's disappearance. It happened over Google Chat, and it was between Jenna and an account that Will didn't recognize. Now, in that conversation, the unidentified person asked Jenna to leave her parents' house and come back to her apartment. Jenna made it clear she didn't want to. They kind of go back and forth arguing for a while. The other person applied a lot of pressure and acted pretty aggressive toward Jenna in these messages, but it was impossible for Will to say what happened after that. If she agreed to head to the apartment or if the other person just gave up on trying to get her out of the house. Because let's be real, Jenna had gone back to the apartment. That wouldn't explain much. It would still be unclear why she would have taken her suitcase and a tapestry but left behind her makeup, shoes, and charger. And on the other hand, if someone had attacked Jenna at her parents' house, that also kind of doesn't explain the bizarre scene. I mean, it wasn't even clear if this chat had anything to do with Jenna's disappearance. And it's also hard to say what the police did with this information, if they did anything. I do know that the Van Gelderens kept trying to find new leads after this one failed to pan out. Roseanne called hospitals and police departments to ask for updates. Every night she went to bed and she made sure her phone was nearby just in case Jenna might call and reveal that she was still alive and okay. Now, her mother and Leon prayed regularly. The rabbi at their synagogue led services where they asked God to send Jenna home safely. And when nothing else worked, the Van Gelderens decided to give some statements to the press. Their hope was that if they could bring attention to Jenna's disappearance, they might reach someone who knew something. Maybe they would finally track down a tip that could save Jenna. Now, sadly, like almost everything in this case, it doesn't go anywhere. The case was growing cold and nobody knew what had become of her. And I hate to say it, but years went by without any new developments. And by late 2021, the Van Gelderens were losing hope. In fact, they believed that if Jenna was alive, she would have found some way to contact them by now. It had been nearly 4 years with no news. The fact was that it was hard to stay optimistic. They needed some kind of closure just for the sake of their mental health. So as the 4th anniversary of the disappearance approached, they began the process to just have Jenna legally declared dead. A week later, they held a memorial service where they could mourn her. And at the service, they also made another public call for tips. Because even if Jenna was dead, there was still a chance that they could solve the case and learn who had killed their daughter and why. Now, in the meanwhile, all they could do was come up with theories. And a lot of people assumed that Jenna's new friends were to blame. The people who had allegedly pressured her to steal from her job and gotten her fired, they believe might have kidnapped or killed her too. The problem is, those friends' identities have not been made public. The police have never named any of them as suspects. So it's hard to say if there's any truth to this theory, and we certainly don't know what motive these friends would have had to kill Jenna. It's also worth mentioning that at the time of Jenna's disappearance, she did have a boyfriend, but his identity hasn't been released to the public either. The police questioned him, apparently, soon after she went missing, and he said he was one of the last people to ever see her alive. In fact, the boyfriend said that the night before her disappearance, she had dropped by his house, and while she was there, he claims he broke up with her. He also said that Jenna at the time was abusing controlled substances and she was doing sex work. I need to note that nobody has been able to verify any of that. These are all rumors that have come up in this case. There's no hard evidence that Jenna ever was doing sex work or using drugs, so it's impossible to say if the boyfriend was telling the truth, but for whatever reason, the police have ruled him out as a suspect too. There's one other person of interest who's worth mentioning, and that's Jenna's roommate. But this is interesting. After Jenna's disappearance, her roommate refused to let the police search their apartment. This was in spite of the fact that he was already planning to throw all of her things away. According to him, he was annoyed that she had disappeared right before rent was due and she hadn't paid yet. He wanted to get rid of all of her stuff and find a new roommate to cover the month. But if all of Jenna's possessions were headed to the trash anyway, why wouldn't he just let the police look at them? The behavior was very strange, except presumably the investigators knew something the rest of us don't, because they also ruled him out as a suspect early on. And without the friends, the boyfriend, or the roommate, it's kind of hard to know who else might have hurt Jenna, which I hate to say is where things stand today. As of this recording, Jenna's disappearance is still unsolved. Her body has not been found, which means it is possible she could be alive. The local police are still collecting tips on her whereabouts. So if you think you know anything about Jenna's case, you can call 770-724-7715. She is a white woman with black hair and brown eyes, and at the time of her disappearance, Jenna was 25. She would be 33 by now. There is a Star of David tattooed on her upper thigh, and when Jenna was last seen, she was in black yoga pants and a green t-shirt with the words San Antonio written on it. Now, before I wrap up this episode, I want to return to the idea that I began with. That sometimes families aren't perfect, and that was the case for Jenna and her parents. Clearly, there had been some distrust and miscommunication, but even with all of this, they still loved one another. And to this day, Jenna's parents are still waiting for answers about their daughter. It is tragic that she disappeared while they were going through a difficult time, and I only hope that they'll get solutions and closure soon. And that is the story of Jenna Van Gelderen. I think it is important to get this case out there in hopes that there is someone who knows something about what happened. I think the tapestry could be a pretty major clue because it wouldn't make sense for her to need it, so maybe someone else did. I truly believe in this case, someone knows something, and it's time to come forward. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I will see you next week as we dive further into the dark together. Goodbye.